Thank you for taking this precious time and joining us for this important webinar, Steering a Business Through COVID-19. It is without doubt that we're in uncharted waters on the onset of this pandemic that is crippling the world. The world GDP as of today is around 90 trillion for 2020, and the first 3 months of January, February, March, we have already lost 3.2 because of the pandemic. But first and foremost, and more importantly, we have lost precious lives. The ripples of this pandemic have reached all walks of life, and in the process has interrupted our daily routine and our business. If we were to look today at the World Health Organization COVID-19 tracker, and if we look locally in Oman, we have 1,266 cases. Of this, 6 we have deaths, 233 are recoveries. In terms of the mortality rate, is 0.0047. If you drill deeper and look at the world as a whole, it's 2.396 million. This is a huge number. The deaths, 164,534. Total recoveries, 623, 135, giving a mortality rate of 0.069. It's one too many. The webinar will have 3 facets to answer the title put forward. We are privileged and humbled today to have very distinguished guests with us who will be speaking. So in the 3 facets, the first one, we will discuss what is COVID-19 and how to mitigate the risk. This will be addressed by Dr. Peterson, who is the special advisor for the Ministry of Health, and he's an associate professor in Denmark and University College London. This will be followed in the second facet about, of course, the mental health during the pandemic, which sometimes we tend to forget about this, a very important subject. Dr. Marie-Louise is the Regional Director for Middle East, Northeast Africa for the International SOS. Then on the third facet, last but not least, we will discuss about the COVID-19 response, strengthening the business continuity through disruptive events. This will be done by Mohammed Nayaz from Ernst & Young for MENA region. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Peterson to the webinar, and maybe he can just give just 1 or 2 lines before we start the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, for your generous introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me to give a talk here. I'm an infectious disease specialist, have been working in the field for more than 30 years, and as you said, I'm sitting in the Ministry of Health now as part of the COVID task force. And one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves in this situation is, how do we get back to a normal life? What do we do when the businesses open again? Because this is a virus that will not disappear completely within the next few weeks or next few months. This virus will probably be present in our society at a low level until we have a vaccine which we can give to everyone. So the most important measure when we control this virus, and this is what we have done in Oman very successfully, is to keep distance between people. And that is called physical distancing. We don't like the word social distancing because we are keeping our social relationships as much as possible, but physical distancing. The virus transmits by small droplets, which goes out of our body when we are coughing, and sediment to surfaces, to our hands, and so on and so forth. So when we think of, for instance, an office which is going to open in the next few weeks, what do we do? Well, if we look at the rules in here,
Sorry, dear audience, I think we've just lost Dr. Peter. So basically, just to recap what he was saying, he was trying to basically define what coronavirus is.
Yeah, I'm in again, I think. Yeah. So what is important is that when we look to other countries, countries, what they have done when they are going back into business is that they keep distance between their employees. So, for instance, in Austria, they have a rule saying you have to have 20 square meters for every person who is sitting in your office. And many offices, they are opening with only half of the staff working and the other half of the staff working from home. So it is important when we open up, we keep our distance. We sweep our tabletops maybe 2 or 3 times a day to make sure that any droplets which has sedimented is removed. We wash our hands frequently to make sure that we have not touched something like a door handle, the button in the escalator, which may be contaminated by somebody else. And this is rules which will be here for the next 6 to 12 months until we have a vaccine, because the virus will still be here, but we have to open business. We have to get back into economic, productive lives so we can start our businesses again and start our society moving. So basically, every office, every workplace should have a plan how they can start being productive again with all workers still keeping their physical distance. Of course, one of the specific problems we have in Oman is the population of migrant workers who may be working in our offices, in our factories, and then in the evening they go back to a camp where they are sleeping maybe 10 people together in a single room. And this is a special risk group because they are living close together when they are not at work. They cannot keep the physical distance as we require everybody else to do. So these people must be really instructed to follow the rules when they are at work. So that is my basic message here, that you have to have a long-term plan for the physical distancing between your employees when you start off your business, and keeping, as they say in Austria, 20 square meters in every office for every worker is a very good idea, and you have to plan it. Also, distance working is here to stay. Many of us we can do working from our laptops, just as we are doing now. Instead of having a physical meeting, we are having a virtual meeting, and that is a very good idea. So I think this is my core message. Physical distancing is tremendously important. Hand hygiene, sweeping surfaces, and expect this to be in place for months to come, even though the economic activities are opening up, but the physical distancing is here to stay for a long time in the future. So I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your explanation about what COVID-19. Maybe I would like for you just to rewind a little bit and just explain where did it actually come about. Some people said that it came from bats, a mutation in China. Maybe you can just expand a bit more there, and then we'll go into the measures of how we should do this to survive in this pandemic.
Okay, yes. No, this is a new virus which we have not seen before. So none of us have any immunity, and that is one of the main differences from influenza. When you look at the genetic code in the virus, it's quite clear that this came from bats. There's no doubt about it, and bats are natural reservoir animals for coronaviruses. They have several hundred coronaviruses. These viruses, they change a little bit all the time, and this virus just happened to change so it fit a protein on the surface of our cells very well. Then we think that the virus came into humans at the animal market in Wuhan in China, and how the precise mechanism we don't know. But this new virus virus, when it started infected humans, it was very effective because it had a good ability to stick to our cells in our airways. So whenever there was a person coughing, excreting the virus, the next person inhaling it got infected because it was very effective in going into our cells. So the receptor, the protein on the surface of our cells is found both in the nose and in the throat, in the lungs, and in several other tissues. So the virus can easily go into our body, into our cells, into our lungs, and cause an inflammation. And when the virus do that, it activates our immune system, and that's how we get immune. We don't really know how long time immunity will last because that's required that we look for our antibodies, and these assays are not ready yet. But we expect that after having the infection, there will be a protection for a certain amount of time, maybe 6 months, maybe 12 months, maybe even longer. We don't know yet.
Thank you very much. So basically what I understood is that, is this kind of like a similar strain to MERS and SARS?
A what?
The coronavirus is the same family as SARS.
There's two other serious coronavirus infections, which is called SARS and MERS. These two viruses has a much higher mortality, and they have a high degree of similarity when you look at the genetic code. But this SARS, this new virus, it behaves very differently because it's much more infective. It's much more easier for it to move from one person to another compared to the other viruses. And in many cases, this is not causing a serious infection. But if you are elderly, if you have comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, you are in an increased risk of getting a serious infection.
Okay, thank you very much. And I really appreciate that you mentioned people that are susceptible. Just to repeat that, so you said people with heart problems, diabetes, and hypertensive. So they need to take more care with that as well. Okay, so you've already discussed of how we should protect ourselves. Okay, and a lot of people would like to know is, you mentioned it very briefly, but just give me some more details. How long do you think this is going to last, this pandemic?
Well, the acute outbreak, as many countries are experiencing now, that will take 6 to 8 weeks. If you implement a community lockdown, as we are doing in Oman, we are doing exactly the same as most European countries are doing, what they're doing in New York and what they did in China, that we are simply closing down the country to make sure that people do not make contact with each other. This is a very effective way of stopping it, but it's also a very crude way, and it has an enormous economic cost. But we are doing the same as everybody else. So we expect that there will be an the ongoing outbreak, and you mentioned the numbers in the beginning, will last for 6 to 8 weeks. After that, the virus will not disappear. It will be here, and as we open up society, there will be smaller and larger outbreaks, which we can handle, but that's the price of opening up again. And that will continue until we have a vaccine. So we think that the virus will be here for the next 6 to 12 months, and we will have to keep the physical distancing at our home and our workplaces, avoid big meetings in order to avoid big outbreaks until we have a vaccine, and that will take at least 12 months.
Okay, thank you very much. You mentioned a very good point. You're saying that a vaccine will actually take 6 to 8 months. Can you give me more specifics? So based on my own internal reading, I think University of Oxford have actually said that within the next 1 or 2 weeks, within the month of April, they're going to start, I think, phase 3. There are 3 phases, if I'm not mistaken. So you have development and testing and all as well. So University of Oxford is saying that it's possible, if there's no actually interruptions in the testing, the development goes well, they may finish in September. Do you agree with this or disagree with this?
Well, you said the key sentence, if it goes well, and nobody knows. I mean, this is the Oxford vaccine is constructed with another vaccine, another virus, an adenovirus, as what we can say a carrier virus. So you take the COVID virus and you put it into the adenovirus, which is another upper respiratory virus, and then you use this artificial construct to give to people and see if they develop a protective immune system, immune reaction. And that is one of the strategies you can have, but we don't know if it's going to work. And it has never worked in humans before. This adenovirus construct has never been behind any other vaccine in humans, and that's why it may work. We can hope it works. We can hope they are right. Another thing you have to realize is that when we give vaccines, we do things to people who are completely healthy. And therefore, we cannot accept side effects, adverse reactions. So the vaccines have to be safe. And that is why the Oxford vaccine, they are planning to do a trial. I think that, as you mentioned, the phase 3 trial will be about 3,000 people. So this is a huge endeavor. And they also have to measure that they actually get a protection after it. So maybe they can start this phase 3 trial in a few weeks' time. Let's hope so. But it will take several months before you have the full set of results. And if it doesn't work, then that's it. But I think there's 17 companies around the world working on vaccines, and I would be very surprised if one of them wouldn't work very well.
Thank you very much. You talked about 17 companies doing vaccine. If you have a look at the Milken Institute, which is a vaccine tracker, there are 86 vaccines out there. If you look at another body, it's around 115 vaccines. This is really nice to have these numbers. My concern is, are we all coordinated? You hear some people taking malaria type of medication, some people doing some other type of medication. Are we all aligned? Are we having a mechanism? I know it needs to be done maybe through the World Health Organization, but is the mechanism really set there to make sure that we get the results as quickly as possible in the most effective way without damaging people's health?
I think that the World Health Organization has a very, very important role to play here, because there's a lot of products which are out there which is not really thoroughly tested. We can specifically right now, we have a problem with tests that are measuring antibodies against the virus. And these antibody tests are not thoroughly validated. They are some say that some of them doesn't really work up to the standard we would expect. So the WHO would be a very, very important regulator of vaccines, but also the Federal Drug Administration in the US, the European Medicines Agency. They would have to approve vaccines to make sure that they are giving the protection we expect without causing undue side effects. That is very important. So there is a regulatory issue also, even though I'm sure that both the EMA and the FDA, they will fast track any vaccine against the COVID virus, of course.
Thank you very much for your fantastic reply. Since you're physically advising the Ministry of Health, I think we are privy to the information that I think Oman, and we've started some plasma therapy. Could you please tell us for the audience what that is and how we're getting on in Oman?
Yeah, the plasma therapy, it's not a new idea, and it has been tested for other infections like influenza also. The idea is that when you have been through an infectious disease like COVID, your immune system has produced antibodies, which is able to recognize the virus. And once the antibodies has stuck to the surface of the virus, your immune system will remove it. Basically, it's a very good idea. And I must say that to get this project up and approved in a few weeks' time in Oman is really amazing, and it's very well done. The problem with this therapy is that it has to be given very early in the infection, because you have a high number of virus in your body for the first 3 to 5 days. After that time, you become very ill because your immune system may overreact. So the plasma has to be given within the first 3 to 5 days after you start being ill. If you give it later, it will most probably have no effect. But theoretically, it's a very good idea.
Thank you very much for being very clinical, saying that you must give it within 3 to 5 days. I think many of us were not sure of that. I think also India is doing these things as well, and some other viral type of things as well. Is there anything else that, in terms of the vaccine, in your opinion, is how can I explain? Which vaccines do you think, or which methodology will be the most successful in your opinion?
Well, I don't know, but if you look at influenza vaccines, they are still made the old-fashioned way, where you grow the virus and then you purify the whole virus particles and you inject them. As far as I know, nobody is trying to do that in coronavirus. I'm not a lab person, so I don't know if you cannot grow coronavirus in sufficient numbers in the laboratory. But this has to be a vaccine, I think, which is made by genetic engineering of the virus, like the group in Oxford is trying, that they have what we can call a carrier virus, and you put the genetic sequence from the COVID virus into this carrier, and then you hope it will work. It has to be some kind of artificial construct. I don't think you can grow coronavirus and make a vaccine just like you do for influenza, and that means that we are really in uncharted territory regarding vaccines, because we don't have any other vaccines in humans that have been made this way. So this is really new.
Okay, so again, you're saying we are basically in uncharted waters, as I mentioned in the introduction. It's very unfortunate that we are in this predicament, but I think the whole world is actually rallying together and trying to find a vaccine as soon as possible. I'm also aware that certain patients that are extremely ill, they're actually giving them some of the medicine to see how they react. Is this a wise policy? I suppose it is, because if we don't have any other situation to recover patients, is there another way to go forward?
I think that the way to go forward is to have clinical trials. You have to realize that no matter what kind of medicine you are given, there will always be side effects. Side effects may be rare or common, but no medicine have no side effects. So you have to balance the risk to your patient with the potential benefit. And if there's no documented benefit, then you really have to ask yourself, are we really doing something good here? I can give you an example that in the beginning of the COVID pandemic, there was a lot of use of chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine in Sweden, and then they had cardiac side effects. So the Minister of Health said, okay, you can only use chloroquine if it's part of a randomized control trial. And randomized control trial means that half of your patients get hydroxychloroquine and half of them do not. And this is how we usually test whether a treatment is effective or not. And I think that you need to have trials in order to give the answer, is this effective or not? Also because it's not cheap. And if you are inducing more side effects than you have good effect, I think we really have a problem. So we need to have the the discipline to perform tests, and the WHO has set up a mechanism where people can participate in these kind of trials. So we will get an answer whether which medicine works and which medicine doesn't work.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a more a lighter type of question to ask is, I've heard from the media that if you look between a male and a female, I've been hearing, and I need for you to substantiate whether this is true or not true, that it's more susceptible for males to pick up the virus compared to the women because the women have 2 X chromosomes. Is this correct or not correct?
Well, it is true that women have 2 X chromosomes and the men are disadvantaged by only having 1. It is true that you have a higher morbidity and mortality in men. But it's still early in the pandemic and we have no explanation. I think that if you look in general in many populations, you will see that women are living 2, 3, 4 years longer than men. And I think that one of the explanations could be that men in general are not as healthy as women. We are more often overweight. We probably more often have a cardiac disease. In some societies, men make smoke more than women does. So whether the higher morbidity and mortality in men is because of lifestyle or simply because of genetic setup, I don't know. But I would guess it's our lifestyle. Men are generally living a few years shorter than women, and that is our lifestyle and not our genes.
Okay, so basically we need to get our act together as men then. Okay. Well, anyway, I think we've covered a lot of good questions there to cover what is COVID-19 and what are the vaccines out there and what is basically the duration. So I think what we will do is, I think we've touched it quite well. Maybe what we need to do now is to go to Dr. Anne-Marie and take the mental health, unless you have any further more points that you would like to add, Dr. Peterson.
No, thank you very much. I will stay with you, and if there's somebody else who wants to ask some questions, I'll be happy to take further questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peterson. That was very insightful. As I mentioned in the introduction, we sometimes tend to forget of really how important mental health needs to take place. If you have a look, I was looking at India just the other day. When they started their 21-day lockdown, they had 20% cases of mental illness just because of the lockdown, to do with anxiety. So with this point, I think it's the right time to bring in Dr. Marie-Louise, who's basically a regional director, and she can shed more lights on this as well. So please, we can just go over to her.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Mohammed, for the very kind introduction. If we can maybe just bring up the slide presentation in the meantime. So by way of introduction, yes, my name is Ms. Van Eck. I'm International SOS, and International SOS is basically the world's leading medical and security assistance company. And as part of this, we are really actively assisting our clients during this pandemic that we're currently seeing now. And I thought before we get into the real topic about mental health and resilience and how we can assist people coping with this, it's probably worth just reminding ourselves why is social distancing so important. Now, unfortunately, Mohammed, I can't see my slides on the screen, so I can't control them. But if you can just go to slide 2, please, so that the audience can see that, that'll be great. So why is social distancing so important to us? Now, if you look on the left of the screen, you will see that there is a graph. And this graph depicts what our European colleagues have implemented by way of measures to try to slow and suppress the spread of COVID-19 across Europe. Now, this only depicts the measures for the month of March. And it's not really that important which day of the month or which country did what when. What is really important is the fact that we do see that the 5 measures that they have taken in terms of mandatory self-isolation, the social distancing, banning their public events, closing their schools, and ultimately going into lockdown, the modeling has shown that this has already averted up to 120,000 deaths within Europe, which is really quite a lot. Now, another very interesting study that was done was the study done by the University of Sydney, and they looked at what physical distancing would do in order to flatten the curve. You would have heard constantly on the news about flattening the curve. Now, what that means is we are trying to get to a point where the amount of new cases of COVID-19 decreases to such a level where our local health systems can actually cope with the increase of these cases. So in other words, although we still see cases, the healthcare system can cope. And we saw that that was one of the big things that the US actually struggled with. They had a huge increase in cases, was just not able to cope with this, and they really had to actively try and flatten out the curve. Now, in this study, what the University of Sydney showed was that if 70% of people comply with this physical distancing guidelines, and that's the orange line on your graph, you will still see a continuous growth or continuous exponential growth of cases. It is only once you start seeing 80% of your population comply, and that is the green line, that you can really see the curve starting to flatten, new cases starting to decrease. And then we speak about a 100-day rule. So it takes about 100 days from that you implement the physical distancing guidelines to really see this curve flatten. And then on the blue line, you can see if 90% of your population actually complies with these guidelines, by day 100, 120, you really see a large decrease in new cases and your local health system is able to cope. Now, what is interesting about this specific model is they went further and then looked at, okay, so if we have now flattened out the curve and we now raise all the restrictions, international travel start again, schools reopen, public gatherings are allowed, what happens then? And they have seen on this model, or they've predicted on this model, that if restrictions are being lifted in 40 days after the 100 days, so by day 140, we will once again a very large exponential growth in cases, and we can face a second wave. Now, why is this important to us? So what I'm trying to say here is we are in this together, and we are in this for the long haul. This is definitely not a sprint. This is a marathon. And hence it becomes really important that we take care of ourselves and we take care of others, especially in terms of their mental health. Mohammed, if you can just go to slide 3, please. So on slide 3, you will see this is the factors that influence mental well-being. Now, I apologize, this is an extremely busy slide and we won't go through every one. What I did want to show here is just numerous factors that actually impacts on someone's mental health or mental well-being. So on this slide, you will see the worker is there in the center as the blue circle. And he also has relatives that he's worried about. Maybe he's not currently with them. Maybe he's isolated in a foreign country very far away, or his relatives are far away. That really impacts on his overall well-being. Then, furthermore, if you look at the various black circles in front, he's now working from home. He's changed his working environment. He's lost that normal routine of going to work, coming home. There's a lot of distractions now. Schools have closed. So we're seeing a lot of parents also struggle with this because now children have to do e-learning. It's a different setup. Parents still need to work, but they have to still assist their children. We're also seeing a lot of social isolation. They can't see their friends, they can't see their relatives physically, and although technology is there, we as humanity require that true human interaction and that true human touch. Then furthermore, we also see that the working population, they are anxious about the disease itself, right? And how COVID-19 is affecting them, their family, their relatives, their friends. It is a pandemic, so chances are that they already know people who have been infected or are suspected of the disease. So there's a lot of stress and anxiety surrounding the overall infection. Then furthermore as well, we know that a lot of companies are struggling within this economic climate. So even though the workers are working from home, the job demands have not changed. And as a matter of fact, most likely they have increased with increased expectations to try and keep companies afloat during these turbulent economic times as well. And then also depending on where you are based, some of these workers may not be in a country where the healthcare is sufficient to manage with this pandemic, not have all of that really negatively affects the workers' well-being. One of the main factors that we're also seeing that contributes largely to this is what we call the social infodemic. There's so much information out there regarding COVID-19. And unfortunately, not all of the information is correct. So we tend to urge people to find one or two resources best, and also use those resources wisely. Limit what you look at on a day-to-day basis and only use trusted resources. Social media is full of fake news and fake cures, and this really impacts on the anxiety that we're within the population. So Mohammed, if you can just go to slide number 4 for me, please. So this slide to a large extent summarizes what I have mentioned on the mental well-being slide. However, once again, just to reiterate, stress and anxiety within this pandemic, they are real emotions and they are honestly warranted. So it's important to express these emotions and to own these emotions. It's also normal to feel the type of loneliness that we're currently feeling in this environment where we are working from home and where we are in this position of social distancing, because if you think about it, to a large extent, we have experienced the loss. We've experienced loss in our daily routine. We're not going to work, we're not going to school, we're not physically meeting up with friends. So we see a lot of people going through some form of a grieving process, this loss, and loneliness impacts on this. So as managers, as work colleagues, as teammates, we need to be very cognizant of the fact that these emotions are real. And then one of the other things that we're still seeing is, even though it's better day, there's still a large health-related stigma or discrimination sometimes that we see when it comes to mental health. So people are still afraid of speaking out, still afraid to stick up their hand and say, I have an issue, I have a problem, and they often don't know where to turn to. So I think as employers and as companies, it's really important that as part of our business continuity plans or our crisis management response plans, we also factor in a mental health response plan. So we as a company, we have medical professionals as part of our company. So employees can easily reach out to physicians that can provide advice. And not all physicians are equally good at providing mental health advice either. So medical company, we have a joint venture partner called Workplace Options that are dedicated psychologists that our employees and us as managers can actually reach out to get this type of advice. And it's really important important that we set up an employee assistance program most often before a pandemic, so that people know where they can go to when they experience mental health issues or when they are struggling to cope within environments such as this. Mohammed, if you can just go to slide number 5, please. So for us as managers or for us as work colleagues or teammates, it's really important now that we can't just get up and walk into someone's office and go and sit down with them and have a cup of coffee. We often don't pick up maybe on the nonverbal cues that well. We as managers really need to focus on active listening, and employees are putting forward. And most often, they don't want us to fix the issue. They just want us to listen. But we have to be kind and we have to be empathetic. And as far as possible, try and use video conferencing to speak to your colleagues and to your employees so that you still try and keep that face-to-face contact and face-to-face interaction. Then as managers, we have to remember that a positive attitude breeds positivity. Now, there's a lot of things that we can't control, but we have to remain positive and we have to bring that message of positivity across to our teams, especially during this period. We need to make sure they understand that we are there for them, but we have a very positive outlook as well. So, for example, what I do with my team is we have a virtual coffee every morning, and we don't just focus on COVID-19. We speak about a lot of different things, but we always end up with the nothing bad lasts forever, and we are one day closer to this being over. So remain positive and bring that positive message across. Then when it comes to working from home as well, as a manager, set very clear goals and attainable goals, whether it's a daily goal or a weekly goal for your team, which they can accomplish, because that gives them that feeling of control. And also encourage them to take care of their physical and mental well-being. We have some of our teams that's doing a morning yoga session together, where they have a virtual call and they're all doing yoga, or all have a aerobics class that they do as well. And it's important for us as managers to do the same and take care of our physical and mental well-being so that we can really set the scene and lead by example. Then in terms of our team members or our colleagues as well, if you are part of a team, accept the fact that the feelings that you feel, such as anxiety, fear, frustration, these are normal. Acknowledge them, own them, and speak to your managers and to your colleagues about them. As mentioned on the previous slide as well, choose very carefully those to get up-to-date information on this virus. There's a lot of things not known yet, but looking at social media and following the fake news really does not help curb these feelings of anxiety that you may feel. Focus on the stuff that you can control. So think about, what can I do today? What is my goal for today? What do I want to accomplish today? And stick to that. And reach out to your employer or to your colleagues if you start feeling overwhelmed or you are really struggling in terms of mental health, so that you can get the necessary support. Mohammed, if you can just go to slide 6 for me, please. So just a couple of tips for working from home. So now, working from home doesn't mean you need to work all the time and be on all the time. So you have to build healthy habits. So firstly, think about it. If you go to the office, you would get up in the morning at 6, you would have your coffee, you would shower, you would have breakfast, get dressed, and then go to the office. It is important now that you're working from home that you stick to that same routine. So set a specific routine, stick to it, set your working hours, and and really protect your personal time. If you say I'm working from 8 to 6 o'clock, turn off your laptop, spend that time with your family, make your video calls, do an exercise session. Make sure you set priorities for that specific day. Also set frequent break times for lunch and coffee as well. I have colleagues that's using their phones and setting specific reminders. So at 11 o'clock and at 4 o'clock, they have an alarm that goes off and they break and they have a coffee. And the same for the lunch. So set reminders to keep yourself on track as well. And then if you can set up a dedicated work area. Now, some people are fortunate enough to have a home office. I do not. So I had to set up my workstation on our dining room table. However, set up in such a way that I light, it's quiet, I have no distractions. So set up a station where you can work for the day, but tonight when you stop working, you can physically leave that station. So up and you move out of that room or away from that area where you worked. Mohammed, if you can just go to slide number 7 for me, please. So once again, we've touched on physical and mental well-being and how to maintain that a little bit, but it's really important to stay active, exercise, build that into your routine, make a reminder to do that once every day or 3 times a week, whatever you need. Ergonomics at your workstation is also really important. Make sure that you have a comfortable chair, a high enough desk, a lot of light so that you can see, nothing that strains your eyes on your laptop, somewhere where you can really close the door and get away from distractions as far as possible. And then stay positive. We're all in this together. We're all in this for the long haul. If you can just go to the next slide for me, please, Mohammed. Then also, social distancing does not mean social isolation. We have a lot of technology at our fingertips, and we really have to use it. So check in with your teams frequently and set scheduled meetings, whether it's a morning coffee or an afternoon break, but really make time and use your video conferencing. It's really important to see each other, pick up on those non-verbal cues that you might not be able to hear over the phone, and keep them informed as well. Make sure that the manager or as a colleague are sound and discuss that, but also take time out to not just speak about the pandemic. You know, our team sometimes have a show and tell, you know, where they would show pictures of what their children drew the previous day at school. Take a bit of a mental break from the pandemic itself and discussing that as well. And then ensure that you and your team have the tools available to you to actually work properly from home. There's nothing more frustrating if the laptop doesn't work or you don't have the correct mouse or keyboard available to you or not the correct software. So make sure that everyone can work with as little frustration as possible. Next slide, please, Mohammed. And then lastly, and this is probably the most important tip, this is about building a healthy sleep routine. So we know that on average, adults need 6 to 8 hours of proper sleep a night to really function well. And we also know that if you don't get enough sleep, you are 8% less effective than your colleague that does sleep between 6 and 8 hours a night. So it's really important to build that sleep routine, go to bed at the same time every night, set your alarm, wake up at the same time. So really establish that routine, sleep. So make your room really dark, make sure it's quiet, you don't have distractions there, and get rid of the technology. An hour or 2 before going to bed, disconnect from your laptop, turn off your phone, don't have coffee too late in the day, stay away from the caffeinated drinks, and really make sure you get enough sleep. So in this unprecedented times that we stand now, there's a couple of hints and tips that I've now provided to you guys. But I think the most important is during this time, we really have to act with kindness. We have to be very empathetic to each other's needs. We have to act with love. We just need to do that at a distance for now. I'll take some questions, Mohammed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you very much, Marie-Louise. You talked about using the internet to the effective, positive effect of meeting face-to-face. But as you know, sometimes technology doesn't always work out, as you can see what has happened to us as well in some of the webinars as well. So with this in mind, how can you monitor people's anxiety and stress levels if you can't physically meet them since we have a lockdown? Not everyone will have access to a computer, or even if they do have access to a computer, sometimes it's interrupted because the network is very, very poor. So how do you ensure that that individual in your working team is okay?
That's actually a great question, Mohammed. Now, I think one of the main things you need to look out for, especially if you are a manager and you are working with a team and you can't necessarily see them by video, which is obviously the best way to do that, but even just by speaking to them over the phone, you will see specific behavior. Every employee has a specific way of working, and if you've been managing that employee for quite some time, you will know that they're reliable, they're working hard, what they usually do, what they won't do. So as soon as you start seeing, let's say, a bit of virtual or social disengagement or a change in behavior, they might start missing deadlines, they may start canceling meetings or not pitching, or you might start seeing that they complain a bit more, or they're much more angry or frustrated than you usually know them. That's usually a good indication that something may be up. And they might not want to tell you as a manager, but I think it's really important that you as a manager then start reaching out as well to other colleagues in the team and say, hey, have you noticed this gentleman or this lady seems to be more angry or a bit more frustrated? Is everything okay? Something up? Reach out to those team members to all speak to them. And obviously, if you have a true concern about their mental health or well-being, it's worth speaking to them directly about it, ask the question, and also arrange an intervention. So one of my members have really struggled with working from home and not being able to manage that routine. And okay, it's fine. If you don't want to speak to me, that's perfectly acceptable. I fully appreciate it. But here is a number of someone that you can speak to should you choose to do so. So I think it's just putting those plans in place and really doing your inquiries and being empathetic and sensitive and actively listening to your employee to see if there's a change in behavior.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I think you've given it in a very nice, beautiful way of how to engage the workforce, and having a panic button if you cannot physically answer, somebody else can, because as you're right, sometimes people don't feel comfortable with the immediate what sometimes vis-a-vis. Okay, excellent. Now, you mentioned about an organization that you can reach out. With this in mind, do you think the public, the private, the government, are we doing enough about mental health?
Look, it's difficult to say if we as a community ever do enough. And I think it's every individual's responsibility, every organization's responsibility, and every government's responsibility to also put mental health plans in place for their populations. We know that in certain countries, regions, areas, and even certain communities, there's still quite a large stigma surrounding mental health. And even though I think it's definitely getting better, we do still see it. So probably the best level to start that is at the organizational level. I do not necessarily purely a government's responsibility. So as an organization, you have to make sure that you have an employee assistance program available first and foremost, so that your employees can at least get up-to-date information and have somewhere to go. From there, these assistance platforms should link into the government, but I don't think it's ultimately the government's responsibility to drive this either within the working environment, because each company has a specific working culture, and they will understand the stresses that their specific work.
Yeah, Dr. Marie-Louise, are you still there? You're breaking up.
Yeah, I'm here. Could you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thanks. Yes. What was your last point?
I just basically said that I think it's the best way to deal with this is first and foremost on an organizational level, because the company understands the workplace or the specific workplace stress their employees are under. So it's more important for that organization to put a firm mental health plan or employee assistance program in place than the government doing that.
Okay, thank you very much for your wonderful reply. That's really good. Was there anything else you'd like to address before I hand over to Mohammed Nayaz?
No, thank you very much, Mohammed. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this webinar as well. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And it's very, very, very important what you've done. I just wanted to give some numbers to your slides. If you look at China, we know it all started in China, this first epidemic, then it became a pandemic on 11th of March. In China, there were I think it was around 173 million mental health cases because of anxiety and stress. And I think sometimes we tend to put these things under the carpet. And like Marie-Louise, they need to be addressed, because at the end of the day, people are the greatest assets for the country, for the organization. So thank you very much for that.
It's a pleasure.
Okay, last but not least, we now need to go to the other point on money. Without money, we can't sustain ourselves. We need to buy food, we need to buy things. So I think Mohammed Nayaz will give us some points of how we can strengthen our business continuity through disruptive events. And obviously, the pandemic COVID-19 is a very, very, very much a disruptive event. So please, Mohammed Nayaz, if you can just introduce yourself and just give a few more points about yourself before going to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm not a doctor.
Sorry, Mohammed, thank you so much. So just a brief introduction. Myself, I'm Mohammed Nayaz. I'm a partner in Ernst & Young. Have been in Oman for about 20 plus years and now handling the business continuity and resilience practice of Ernst & Young across the Middle East and North Africa. So I was hearing the two very interesting lectures and presentations by Dr. Peterson and Dr. Mari. Very, very useful information insights. So over the next 15 minutes, I'm going to talk on the business impact on COVID-19 and particularly what are organizations doing in these areas. We have heard about the biological response, which Dr. Peterson mentioned, and the focus on mental health, which Dr. Mari nicely highlighted. So from a business perspective, what we are seeing based on my experience of dealing with multiple companies, especially over the last 3 to 4 weeks, is none of the organizations were prepared to handle a disruption of this nature. So that's coming out clearly. Many of them have been caught off guard. The companies and industries were caught off guard. This is unprecedented. Some of the organizations had earlier developed what is called as a business continuity plans and disaster recovery plans, and those were not entirely applicable in a pandemic disruptive situation, primarily because of 3 main areas. So one is the scale of impact is huge. Right? The impact is not localized to a particular area. The impact is global in nature. It impacts also workforce, customers, suppliers, competitors, other stakeholders. The scale of impact is huge. The second important aspect is the duration of impact is also long-lasting. The earlier business continuity plans which companies usually planned for were planning for disruption for 2 days, 3 days, 5 days, and then planning for recovery after 5 days, etc. But this level of impact, this level of duration of lockdown for 1 month and beyond a month was something that was not envisaged earlier. The third aspect is there is an impact on the workforce shortage. Okay? The impact on public infrastructure, transport availability, people who are traveled out could not come in, people who are in cannot move out. So there is an infrastructure impact on this. So if you can move to the next slide, Mohammed, if possible. So let me see if I can do that. Yeah, I can do it as well. Thank you. So a survey has showed that 75% of organizations agree that the COVID-19 impact has halted the critical business activities. More than 60% have already implemented a working at home policy. In addition, there is the statistics of more than 16,000 new coronavirus-related domains registered in January 2020 alone. And many of them, about more than 70% of them are fake. This is primarily done by the hackers. Unfortunately, they are also utilizing the current situation and trying to make some fast buck for themselves. So the corporates will be careful. Right. So if we can move to the next slide. Now this slide shows how have companies reacted to this crisis, and generally what we have seen this is from a global perspective. The way the companies react, we have divided them into 3 phases, which is now, next, and beyond. So the now phase is the immediate response which the companies have responded to when they were encountering this crisis situation. The 2 primary priorities for the companies were, one is people first, provide the right information to the employees, protect the employees, and make sure that they are safe, and to make sure that they are safe and their families are safe as well. The second priority has been to secure the financial sustainability of corporates. So cash is king. So many of the corporates are were looking at making sure that their outstanding debts, recoveries are focused on and try to collect them as soon as possible. Give them some cash discounts in case they pay early, so on and so forth. So this has been the 2-pronged approach which majority of the organizations have been focusing on. As we move on, the corporates now will need to also focus on the next. So what do I mean by next? Next is the current situation. It gets prolonged maybe in the next 2 weeks, or it could be a month, or it could be beyond. So which is the new normal that we're talking about, working in a lockdown or a restricted scenario. So what do corporates focus on in the next situation? They're focusing on fixing problems in supply chain, ensuring that the production is functioning effectively, ensuring that the sales and customer information is being properly done and they're working effectively, and looking at their portfolio, the cost structures, the new model of operation, etc., etc. So that's been the focus of the companies for the next phase. And then we have the beyond phase. And what do I mean by beyond phase? Beyond phase is post the lockdown, post the COVID. And as Dr. Peterson rightly mentioned, that this is not going to be eradicated. There's going to be a reduction. But at the same time, it's very important to have the social distancing maintained. And it will take at least about 6 months to a year for the right vaccine to come out and to have that eradication pill for us. So the beyond phase is immediately after the COVID situation. What will corporates do? We expect corporates to focus more on maximizing the digital customer access, maximizing the digital interoperability, intensifying customer relationship, enhancing cybersecurity, adapt risk management, look at the new normal, have a flexible workforce, have flexible cost structures, etc., etc. So these are the 3 phases that we are looking for corporates to respond to. And what you see in this bottom half of the screen is the underlying enablers which are important to also be considered in this situation. And these enablers are talent and workforce, which is to keep the employees informed, motivated, committed, and giving some of the ideas which Dr. Mari mentioned, making sure that there's an effective crisis management mechanism in place, which is to manage measures and to make sure that in case a crisis exists, we face another crisis, we are able to manage it in a much better way than we did earlier. Government and public policy, it is to monitor the regulatory changes, monitor from an Oman context, the COVID Supreme Committee comes out with regular communication and updates. So monitoring that information, make sure that we comply with it and make sure that we apply it to the business environment and also to be aligned to the central banks, the regulators that we have in the country as well. And then finally, to also look at the strategic reassessment of the business model where necessary. And in this difficult situation as well, you have some companies who seize growth opportunities and take advantage of them if they are managed well. I'll move on to the next slide. This slide really talks about what are the economists saying in terms of recovery. And we heard from Dr. Peterson the biological forecast of what will happen in the next 6 to 12 months. What we have on this slide is more from an economic scenarios that could happen going forward. So there are theories of 3 scenarios. Scenario 1 is a U or a V-shaped recovery, which means you have the vaccine that's found quickly and the vaccine is contained and the businesses get back to operation pretty quickly and have a U or V type of recovery model. And then you have the scenario 3, which is the L-shaped one, which is you have a flattened curve from where we are in, which is also unlikely. What economics believe that scenario 1 is also unlikely from an economic context. It could perhaps be true from a stock market context, but from an economic recovery, from a business recovery perspective, and U or V from what we see currently is an unlikely scenario. What we see is a likely scenario is what you see in scenario 2, where we call it as a seesaw recovery, where from the current situation where we are in, there will be a recovery and there will be a further crisis management that happens, and then there will be a further recovery, and then further crisis that happens. So there would be some a brief pandemic onset, and then it will be contained and filled, and again it will be onset, etc. So this is the seesaw aspect that we believe the economy will recover from, and as corporates, it's very, very important that we are able to forecast this recovery scenario and then be prepared in order to make sure that when this recovery happens, you are in a safe situation and you're able to manage and navigate through this recovery in a safe and sound manner. What the economists also say that there is new normal of what we are seeing pre-COVID. Okay, so there's going to be more. There's going to be definitely changes in the customer behavior. There's going to be changes in the corporate behavior, and the corporate behavior, the customer behavior will include customers being more receptive towards the digital services. As we are seeing, already a number of organizations have started offering their solutions over the e-channel, and which they had not done so before, although that was a requirement. So there is a rapid, fast track in implementation of solutions in order to enable their online presence more effectively. The other behavior would be the supply chain. Will have new models, because earlier the supply chain focus was very simple, just-in-time production. You don't have extra stock, just keep the stock which is required. You look at only one supplier or 2 suppliers, don't go for many suppliers. Focus on a few, focus on a particular geography, because you don't want to put all eggs in one basket. You want to spread it across. So all these principles are likely to change considering the pandemic experience that we have had, and they're going to have most likely more inventory stock to manage, looking at more critical suppliers, not just focusing on one supplier, so on and so forth. So these are the behavioral changes that we expect, and this will have an impact on the corporates as well. Right, as we move on to the next slide, this slide basically summarizes about 9 key areas which a corporate needs to follow some good practices or to assess themselves if they are following some good practices in response to the COVID situation. This is part of our enterprise resilience framework, which EY has developed for the past 3 to 4 weeks, in order to help corporates navigate through this situation in a better manner. So I'll just take you through some of these circles that you see and what is the impact it has on corporates. First one, let me talk about supply chain. As you can see, the traditional supply chain structures are not equipped to effectively cope with this increasing number of unplanned disruption. As I said, they have geographical concentration, vendor concentration, and low levels of safety stock. Now, these are obviously not helpful in a lockdown scenario, and some of the good practices which organizations adapt to are to identify critical suppliers and evaluate alternative backup options for those critical suppliers, have contingency plans in place to address any supply chain disruptions, and more importantly, model and predict supply impacts and minimize the costs of disruption. The second area is the employee health and well-being. I think a lot of that has been said already by Dr. Mari. But the important thing as well to focus on is how can I effectively and realistically safeguard the health and well-being of my people? And people safety is a priority. And as Dr. Mari said, mental health is something that's very important to focus on. Unfortunately, not many organizations give it the level of importance that it deserves. But it's, at the end of the day, it's the people in the organization who provide services to your customers. So as long as the people are happy, your business is going to be safe. So it's very important to have that extra lens of mental health to our people. The third area is the talent and workforce. So question is, what do I do when most of my business is dependent on employees being on site? Okay? What do I do if there is going to be an absenteeism in my business? Okay? So how will you manage that? How do you make sure that in your employees, you divide them into groups and then make sure that each group has sufficient critical people in it, so that if a one group or team A or team B situation where if team A is infected, then team B takes over, etc., etc. Enable health insurance coverage to make sure that your entire workforce is protected. Customer and brand protection is another area. Customer safety and brand protection. Which is how do I manage my brand and engage with my customers when human interaction is perceived as dangerous and unhealthy. So which is to put in place a marketing and communications campaign to address the impacts of the pandemic. Take safety precautions for your workforce, especially your sales teams, who, in the current situation as well, some of them may travel regularly, especially who are those in the food sector, in the retail sector as well. Increase the need for social media marketing and communications to maintain and increase your brand strength if it's handled proactively and appropriately. Then the financial and investor area as well. So what kind of communications and disclosures do we need to anticipate? And how are we making sure that your board members are appropriately and also the senior management are appropriately updated? The investors, the customers, employees, and other stakeholder concerns are properly informed about your situation. There is a need also for the boards and management to demonstrate clear and competent leadership to all the key stakeholders in the organization. And they should be supported by effective actions and communications. Risk as well is an important area to consider. How do I manage my risk exposure while not feeding into a panic mentality? Are you proactively monitoring disruption triggers, labor disputes, natural disaster, cyber attack, etc.? Is your business continuity plans in place? Have the requisite business impact assessments been done? Do you have the ability to quickly put alternative recovery plans in place? How are you planning to manage and prevent the next disruptive event from impacting your business? Because there's no guarantee that this may not recur. So it's important that you are able to prepare currently so that you're able to handle similar situations in a better manner going forward. So lastly, technology and information security is also an important area to focus because many of the organizations, many of the people are working from home. It's important for the corporates to make sure that they have sufficient technology, infrastructure, scalability to make sure that the people are working safely and securely from home. One of the important aspects is also the information security. And as I said before, because of the expansion of the network of corporates, of people working from home, there is a threat of a cyber attack, which is more happening now than before. And companies need to make sure that they have sufficient controls in place to manage and prevent a cyber attack from the organization. To manage the data privacy, which still is important in the current scenario as well, and it cannot be compromised. So these are some of the areas that I have highlighted from the enterprise resilience framework. So let me just, the last point, go to the last slide. So what we have here is a COVID-19 preparedness assessment tool, which is generated from the framework that we have. And as part of our social connect, we are basically helping organizations, especially the medium-sized sector, etc., to help them navigate through this situation. And we'll be happy to share this COVID pre-assessment preparedness assessment tool to you if you connect with us through the organizers. So just to conclude, what I'd like to say is that the corporates who are not prepared to handle such a disruptive situation, and they are now gradually started reacting to it, and they're able to handle the now situation. But it's very important that the corporates also gradually transition and pivot into a next situation, and then also the beyond, to make sure that you start taking actions now, you plan for it now, and do a scenario modeling to make sure that you forecast multiple scenarios and you are prepared to handle these different scenarios in an effective manner. Thank you. Mohammed, over to you.
Mohammed Nayaz, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very insightful again, and thank you for giving us a very nice economics class on the V-shaped scenarios. And I think this is in line to what people have been giving a lot of information, whether it's positive or negative, but other business schools have also been giving some analysis on whether it's going to be V-shaped or L-shaped and so forth. So I think it seems that you're in alliance to also what IMF International Monetary Fund is doing. Okay, so that's a lot of information for us to take. It's very good with a tiny cover that fits 1,000 words. So with this point in mind, what does it mean to the people on the ground? How is it going to affect us at home from a monetary point of view and a business point of view? So could you just give us a few points on that?
Sorry, Mohammed, I couldn't hear your question clearly. Can you repeat it if you don't mind? Sorry, I couldn't hear that clearly.
I'll show you the question is, you've done a wonderful presentation. We took us through the tool, okay? Before we go to the tool, I would like to know straight away is, what does it mean for the individual at home, on the ground, and the business? What does this pandemic mean in terms of the business? How negative and positive force? If you just give us some numbers.
Sure. So the tool that I mentioned is a COVID-19 preparedness self-assessment tool. So it has, under each of those 9 areas, there are a series of questions which need to be answered by the corporates. By the way, this tool is applicable for the corporates and not for individuals. It's for the corporates to see how well they're handling this crisis situation. And this tool throws up some, it's more like a maturity assessment to see how mature you are to handle this kind of a situation. And it throws up certain numbers to say you are, as per the leading practice, you are 30% compliant in each of these 9 different areas, and overall you are about 40% compliant, etc. So it has a nice a numerical or a quantitative way of demonstrating your compliance to the leading practices. And more importantly, it throws up a next steps or some areas where you have not particularly looked at, and something for you to focus on, especially for the next and the beyond. So I hope that answers the question, Mohammed.
Yeah, okay. So what you answered was basically, in relation to your slides, is basically the tool. So I get that.
Yes.
It is a good way of showing how a company, which is basically for the corporates, how to be prepared for this. situation.
Absolutely. It's a good reference and good practice that corporates can then refer to when, to apply some good practice going forward. Especially corporates have taken some immediate measures in the now. So now it's a good time to see, look behind the last 3 to 4 weeks to see what actions they have taken. Is it in line with the good practices? Can they do something which they can enhance upon? This is the right time to look at that. And this tool will help you achieve that reference.
Okay. Thank you very much. So when you do that slide, there's no like a timeline. So if you had like a beyond the next, can you just give us a time scales, months or weeks?
Yeah, if I understand the question, Mohammed, you're asking how long will this take? Will this line take how many months, weeks? Is that the question?
Correct.
Yeah. Correct. So what we see is we expect to see from end of April, May onwards the reversal to happen, to recovery to happen, and we expect that to continue from May down till December in terms of a seesaw until in fact until the next 8 to 12 months. We expect that seesaw to continue, and beyond that is when it will get back to the stable situation. And it is very closely linked to the biological response, and it's very closely linked to the vaccine, which Dr. Peterson talked about as well. So there is a very close link between the vaccine as well as the business recovery and the economic recovery.
Yeah. Could I say something, Mr. Nadias? Thank you very much for an excellent talk. I just want to point out that the Ministry of Health also developed a guideline for contingency plan to the companies, which were published, I think, about 3 weeks ago. So I absolutely agree with you that this has to be the focal point right now, and it was a very nice presentation that you gave. And I would very much like you to share the slides with us, and especially the self-assessment tool, which I would like to distribute in the ministry.
Sure, Doctor.
Okay, so it's good to see that the slides are value to the speakers as well, to the wider participants in the webinar as well as a whole. Okay, that's excellent. Now, if I can try and drill a bit deeper, is how do you think the economy of Oman is going to be affected with what you have said, Mohammed Nayaz? Can you shed light on that?
Yeah, so definitely, Mohammed. So there is going to be definitely an impact in the Oman economy for sure. And I think we should thank the government. They have taken some hard decisions, actions towards addressing the current situation. So there's going to be a definite impact on this. And what we see is in the next and the beyond stage, the extent of recovery would be, as I said, in a seesaw mode. It's very important for the government to monitor and track the situation very closely and take some economic decisions to address the recovery aspects. The good thing is, what I see is the Ministry of Finance. Perhaps many of you may be aware, the Ministry of Finance has already given some, guidelines to the ministries. There has been a budget cut for at least about 15% across the board in order to manage the current situation. In addition to that, many of the corporates have given some guidelines to the suppliers. There was a letter which BDO had sent across to all the suppliers to bring their prices down 30% on the existing contracts. Oman Oil has also done the same. So there's going to be a knockdown impact in the economy because of this, and at least it's going to. And as you know, the oil prices has also gone down to about $24 now. So that's also going to have a knockdown impact on the economy. So there is no doubt that in an oil-dependent economy like Oman, there's going to be a impact in the next 12 to 18 months, and it all depends on the actions that the government would take in the next 6 months, which will define the speed of recovery back to the normal moment.
Mohammed, would you allow me to just add some more numbers, giving permission?
Sorry, Mohammed.
Yeah, I just wanted to add some numbers from Ministry of Finance and Central Bank of Oman.
Yeah, please.
Okay, I think, Mohammed, what you have mentioned, it's I want to bring reality to the audience of what does this really mean, this pandemic. We've discovered the mental health, we've discovered what it is. It's very important to get to the economics of this. And okay, so basically, like you said, that Oman is a hydrocarbon economy. In fact, it's 72% of hydrocarbons. So basically, as of yesterday, the price of oil has actually gone down. The West Texas Intermediate was around 14.57. Brent was around 24.9. This is a 21% reduction in over 21 years. So again, uncharted waters, unprecedented. It's a big change for the way we're doing business. And I think also yesterday, for monetary measures, Mr. Busaibi, who's responsible with the Ministry of Finance, has actually said that the approved budget of Oman, which is around 10.7, if my figures are correct, 10.7 billion, 10.7 billion. Out of this, Oman straight away is cutting down 500 million. So this is 5% from the actual budget, 10% from the development budget. And you've actually mentioned Oman Oil, you've mentioned about PDO as well, how we have to become more economic rationalization. So unfortunately, it's normality going back, as what the doctor has said, Dr. Marie, and what Peter says, we are linked to the vaccine as well, how this is going to unfold. Okay, so currently it's at 500 million. We don't know what's going to happen. So this is a really big change that we have to be ready, and every single individual in the whole world has to play a part to make sure as humanity that we work together on the mental and as well as the financial side point of view. It's a worrying situation to be in, and I think hopefully we're in a better situation because we had the 2008 and 2009 shock of the crisis. So hopefully we'll be in a better situation. We had like the Ebola outbreaks, we had the H1N1. So hopefully this will put us in good stead to move forward. But what I'm trying to paint a picture is that we really don't know what's going to happen. We have a lot of uncertainty out there. It's a big change for all of us. And I think economically we have to really be ready. Let's hope that we can ride the wind, ride the wave, ride the ripple, shall we say, and move forward. Is there anything else that Mohammed Naz think we can do on monetary easing?
Yeah, I think the central bank is already taking some steps in order to make certain restrictions easier for the banks. Number one. Also, the Capital Market Authority has also taken some steps towards the corporate as well in order to enable them to run the AGMs over the over a video conference. As I said, the central bank has taken steps around the monetary policy, and hopefully that would lead to some effect on the banks and the lending aspects as well, which we will see the effect in the next few months as well. So the inflation rate has also been impacted. So as I said rightly, Mohammed, this is uncharted territory. We are kind of not experience such hits in different environments at the same time, and which we are facing now. And it's very important for corporates to kind of remain steady, to watch the situation and take appropriate actions rather than taking actions that are harmful to the people, and also to take actions which are not appropriate for the economy perspective as well. So it's a combination of all of these. The government is, as I'm saying, that there's a close watch and actions being taken through the Supreme Committee and through the central banks, through the regulators, in order to address the current economic situation. And it's really the next 3-4 months to see how these actions unfold and the impact that they will have on the current economy.
Yeah, thank you very much. So basically what we're hearing that we really have to fill up our boxes. Hopefully we have certain tools and things in place that will actually hopefully make it easier for us to ride the wave. And I think definitely a lot of central banks around the world will have a major role to play in terms of the liquidity and how to react in terms of solvency and how to move forward. And for sure, having these contingency plans will definitely help, I think. Is there any other point that you'd like to address, Mohammed Nayas, before I reply to that?
Sorry, Mohammed. Apologies. I think towards the end, the voice quality is not very strong. I'm not able to answer the hear the questions very well. If your question is there anything else I would like to share?
Yeah, anything else that you'd like
no,
to
I'm good.
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you very much. I really, my last point basically to the participants is really to be, to take the situation in a positive manner. We do experience such shocks, and this is completely unprecedented. So from a corporate perspective, it's very important to support the policies which the company is facing. And some of the companies have asked people to go on leave, etc., etc. So I think it's important to support these corporate decisions and be a good corporate citizen. Thank you.
Well, I can just add that the health sector was as unprepared as the business sector for this event, and we are also learning along the way, and this is unprecedented. So we have to apply new knowledge and common sense and see what is working in the future when we have to lift the lockdown, which is absolutely necessary. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Dr. Marie-Louise, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you very much, Mohammed. No, I think just my final iterate once again that in these unprecedented times, it is even more important that we take care of ourselves and of our families and our community, as after all, we're in this together, basically fighting this global war against the pandemic. So hopefully every day, one day closer to the end. Thank you very much as well.
Well, dear speakers, thank you very much for your very insightful, informative, direct tips that you've given as well along the way. I'll just try, hopefully, to do justice to you by quickly summarizing. I can't take every single point, but I'll just try and take the few, maybe top three for each one. So basically, starting with Dr. Peterson, he very much mentioned about what is the COVID-19. It is a pandemic. It is actually transmitted through droplets. We talked about the importance of doing social distancing, basically 1 meter. He talked about Austria having a 20 square feet, kind of like radius, cleaning the desk. Basically, you need to follow the precautionary measures as mentioned in the Ministry of Health. And we've been hearing it on the TV, internationally, through the World Health Organization. Wash your hands, have masks, make sure that you don't get infected. If you do having the symptoms, report it to the proper authorities, get yourself sorted out. Really, I'm very emotional when I talk about this because really we've got so many deaths. It's really so much unprecedented. I mean, we had the flu around 1918, it was around 50 million. Of course, we haven't got to that level, but still a life is a life. We really need to protect each other. We need to be careful with our mental health. We need to reach with each other. And this was done really well by Dr. Marie, saying that we should use technology to be in touch with each other. Let's keep an eye on those telltale signs of stress, anxiety. Reach to someone that you trust. Reach to an employer if you're having problems on the mental side. It's very, very important. We all need you there. An individual is someone extremely dear to society. So mental health is extremely important. Moving on to the business side, of course, it's been very much correlated that business is unknown, very much unknown. We are dependent on the vaccine coming in. Now, linking back to the vaccine, it's been made very, very clear it's going to take between 8 to possibly 12 months to get a proper vaccine. We heard about Oxford University maybe saying in September, but nothing is guaranteed. We will get back to the offices, but some of these precautionary measures will be there for the long run. This was mentioned in Dr. Peterson and Dr. Marie and also Mohammed Nayaz with his tool. I'm trying to link everything together now in terms of also the mental health. We've got the 13 tips that is very, very important. We've got the contingency preparedness tool. It's nice to see that governments around the world are trying very, very hard with their stimulus packages. If you look at the USA, you have 2.2 trillion in place. Here in Oman, we also have things going on. Central Bank, they've been discussing with the governors in the GCC, and they had a meeting on the 1st of April. And they're very much looking at this the vaccine and when it's going to take place and how some of the measures, just adding some more numbers in terms of what Oman has actually done. If you look at some of the domestic overnight international rate, if you look at November 2019, it was around 2.163. If you look at it now, it's around 1.8. So basically, some of these interest rates have gone down to promote business. Also, the same thing, small, medium enterprises, they're beginning deferments to some of their loans. So everybody is rallying around. This is the first time in the world that we're all trying to do coordinated efforts. And it's very, very important that we stick to it, that we need to be humble of what is actually happening, that this is way above all of us, and hopefully together as a world, as a nation, as a country, as individuals, we will come through from this situation of the pandemic. So on that note, thank you very much for listening to the webinar. I hope you found it useful, and we look forward to welcoming you again very soon. Thank you so much.